Hey everyone, I'm Mike Henry. And this is my Procreate demo for the piece I call Karla's Not Okay. Before we dive into the actual creation of the piece, a question that I get sometimes is around triggering symmetry. And I've talked about this before, but I know like a refresher every now and then is a good idea. So let's quickly show you how to get symmetry started. First, let me just get a black line here so that it'll be really nice and clear once I have it set up. Okay, so there's no symmetry as you can see here. And you can see there's nothing here saying that the layer is assisted or anything like that. If we go over here to our little wrench where we access most of the little tricks that we can do, and we go over to canvas, you'll see the third option down is drawing guide. If you flip that on, and then right below it now, edit drawing guide becomes lit. It's no longer grayed out. You can tap on that and you can do a number of things here. In the past I've shown how to do like perspective and all that. You can see at the bottom where it says 2D grid, isometric, perspective, and symmetry. These are basically the four categories of guides that you can get. Now within them there's also some sub adjustments that you can make, but let's, for the purpose of this so we don't get too wrapped up in things, tap on symmetry all the way to the right. Now you'll see there's already a line. They put it right down the middle of your canvas, which is usually a great spot for it. Also over here in the options section, you can see that there are different types of symmetry, so I highly recommend messing with those and seeing what they do for you. You can also change the color of this line. So for instance, if you want it to be like, let's say your piece is going to be a lot of dark colors and you're not going to use any pink, so set it to pink so that it's nice and clear where it's at, as an example. I'm going to set it to pink because I just like pink. So let's hit done. Now you'll see when you go to your layers it says assisted. Now when you draw, you can see here that you get the mirror on the other side of it. What we'll use it for in this piece is doing something like a human head, which you can do, very quickly. And you get the look that you're going for with the exact symmetry. Now, something else you'll see, and I'll reference it when we get there, is this character isn't 100% symmetrical. She has one eye that's messed up, and her eyebrow is a little adjusted, and her hair is asymmetrical. When you want to do things like that, you can just tap on this layer again and see where it says drawing assist, and there's a little check mark next to it. You can tap on that, and it'll turn it off. And now when you draw, it is no longer symmetrical. Then when you flip it back on, it flips back on. Now, if you need to switch in one piece between several different assisted drawing modes, you will have to go back into here and go to edit drawing guide and change it, and your toggle on your layer will always be whatever the last one is that you set. So if you have to do a lot of this, I could see it maybe being a little cumbersome, but for the purposes of just sketching something that's symmetrical, or maybe you're sketching something that's in perspective and you don't have to switch to symmetrical, it's really an easy flow. If you have to bounce around a lot, you're already taking on a lot of complications, so you're probably prepared for some complication as it relates to layer management and your settings and all of that stuff. One other thing that I just want to point out, another way that you can kind of deal, quote unquote, with this assisted and having to toggle it on and off is if you're going to do something like what I did in this piece. Let's say symmetry wise, ignore my like little lightning bolty things, we've got this head in the center right here. And then if it's like we want to have the asymmetrical hair, just create another layer. Sometimes that's a quicker tap. So in this piece we have hair kind of like this, right? And then if you want to go back to being symmetrical, then you can go like this. And the reason why this is just a little bit faster is because if it's like tap, tap, and then go back to drawing, versus tap, 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 go back to drawing, it saves you a little bit of energy. That's all. Those things do add up over time, but if you're not doing a lot of that bouncing around, it's not a big deal. All right, let's get into the actual creation of the piece now that we know how to set up a symmetrical canvas. Here we are with Karla. She's not having the best day. I did this for Halloween, so the fact that I'm going to be posting this kind of between Christmas and New Year's might feel really weird, but that's what we're going to do. I'm catching up on videos, and my plan is during this holiday break to try to catch up on everything. We'll see. You can see here right off the bat, Karla has that wall-eyed look, which is similar to a piece I did a long time ago, actually almost a year ago, where I did the same thing. In this, I actually knew that I was going to eventually alter one of the eyes. I just didn't really know exactly what that plan was, but I knew I was going to do something along those lines. I wasn't going to try and repeat the exact same thing, but something that I really like, I like this kind of like, you know, really down the barrel, symmetrical, kind of like messed up looking thing with just a few things off. I find it really kind of like fun and creepy. So for Halloween, I had already done the piece for the crow, which you saw in the previous video, and then I thought, you know, that was cool and all, and I definitely that rings true for like Devil's Night and Halloween, especially for me, since I mentioned that I was the crow for Halloween a lot, but I felt like I didn't really put forth like a cool, creepy, really Halloween-y, like horror type thing. So I thought, let's go ahead and do that. And I had this idea for this piece. Now, I actually did the sketch for it. I think I maybe even did the sketch for it before I did the crow piece, but I had completely just put it in the back and was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do the crow one instead. And then that's when I was like, you know, I should bring that one out. So did the sketch, I think, did the whole crow painting, posted that, came back and I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. And I sat down and I banged it out, and I thought that it went a good way. I think it was one of those things where in the beginning I just didn't know what I was going to bring that was going to be unique or special. And then as I was working on it, I was like, you know, I could do something here that maybe if it's not completely unique or special, it's different than something that I normally do. So it'll be really fun to do. So you can see here, when we're doing the painting, we're also using the Symmetry tool, but of course we're turning it off on sections that aren't symmetrical, just like we did with the line. So for this, her ears, her face, her neck and shoulders and stuff, that's all done symmetrically with the Symmetry tool. And then the eyes right now are done with the Symmetry tool with the intention of messing them up. You can see with the sketch underneath, I've got that eye in a weird spot. So I thought what would be maybe a good way to do this would be to draw her eyes, paint her eyes perfectly symmetrical, and then warp them, which is exactly what you just saw there. I pulled that eyelash down and started to make her eye the disgusting thing that it is. Her eyebrow as well, I had already painted that before, but it was the same idea. Paint that as a separate thing, non-symmetrically. Asymmetrically. I mean, non-symmetrically, I guess technically works. Anyways, here we're painting in the eye. So what is the idea behind this character? I don't really have an answer for that. The idea was to actually just stick some stuff together that was creepy. So I thought that it'd be creepy to have her eyes pointing in different directions like that. And I thought that it'd be creepy to have black goo just like pouring out of her in different ways. And I thought that it'd be cool and creepy to have that eye be a little extra messed up. That's it. Build your own mythology as you see fit. Now, right now, there isn't a whole lot of special techniques that I'm using now that we've got kind of like the basis of the piece established. We've got the fact that she is symmetrical except for a few things. She's got the black goo coming out. Otherwise, it's just like flats and color choice, you know, deciding how dead do I want her skin to look. Does she look super blue and cold like she ended up looking? How much do I want the red blush from the nose and the ears to show through? What color do I want the eyes to be particularly creepy? This is just the decision space that we're in here, but as far as the rendering techniques, it's all done with the usual suspects. So we're using the brushes from my brush set mostly. I don't think I diverge, but if you're looking for that brush set, it's linked down below. It's just a Google Drive folder that you can download. It's free. It's got the turpentine brush in there, which I think is called New Turpentine. I always forget because I just get into habits of like where things are and I forget the names of them, but I'm pretty sure it's New Turpentine brush. And then using the big softy and things like that to do like soft airbrushing stuff here and there. Some of what I use and some of what's in that brush set is kind of it's a recreation of some stuff that's already in Procreate, but I just wanted to offer for people like this is the clump of brushes that I use. So even though they've all been built from the ground up, some of them are just trying to replicate like a big soft airbrush and similar things like that. Here we go. Here's an example of a brush that I used that was just in Procreate. It's that like splattery noisy thing. It's probably like grunge brush or something. I don't remember exactly which one it is. Oh, that was me testing the colors that I'm going to use for the shadows. Well, in order to get that grunge brush to be exactly the way I want it, what I did was I put it in with the color and the values that I wanted, and then I duplicated it and blurred the duplication and then adjusted both of those layers the right amount to get the look that I was going for. What this does is it makes it so that it doesn't look like it's just dirt over her skin. It looks like it's some sort of a decay that's like within her skin, and we're seeing it through a layer of skin. It gives it just kind of this creepier, slightly more part of her vibe. It's actually very similar to how you might accurately represent what a tattoo looks like, because a tattoo sits under a couple layers of skin and you don't see it sitting on top, right? It's obfuscated a little bit by those skin layers, and that's kind of what we're going for here. We're getting a little bit of that blurred, a little bit of that, you know, you're looking through something kind of vibe. So now we're doing the form shadow pass, that it's like an AO, but it's not. So that's just me trying to communicate in a neutral light setting what the various forms are. We're using this tannish, like very light pale red, and then it's set to multiply, and that's darkening, and then we are smudging it using the smudge tool. The smudge tool, at this point, the smudge tool, my eraser tool, and my brush are all set to that new turpentine brush, and I'm painting in, you can actually see it sometimes, painting in heavily, just like bleh, here's paint, and then I'm going in and smearing it to soften it and get it the way I want it to. We're going to be doing that as a shadow layer. We're also going to be doing a cast shadow layer and a couple of other things. Occasionally you'll see me switch to the soft airbrush when I'm going for something that's not supposed to be achingly painterly. I will switch to that occasionally just to even out certain things. I want it to look painterly, but there are times where the painterly could be a little on the distracting side, so I soften those areas and then save those painterly marks for just where there's a little bit more value, where you actually get more bang for your buck having them look painterly. We're going to see that a lot in the cast shadows because I leave some rough edges when I do that. So I mentioned the symmetry, and I mentioned that we were painting with symmetry and then turning it off and on. We're doing the exact same thing with the shadow layers. We're going to turn on the symmetry and use our select paint, select clear method in order to paint. Select paint, select clears in the description, so you can click on that and you can see what I'm referring to there. It's just a organized way of going through layers and minimizing your shadow layers and using existing flats to trap and select. So we're using the symmetry tool on those shadow layers, but then of course we're turning it off for things that are asymmetrical. So we're not going to have it flipped on for the hair, and we're not going to have it flipped on for when we want to capture that eyelid, which you can see right there. But something like the ears, I didn't put in any asymmetry into the ears, the mouth, the nose, so it just saves us some time, especially with something that's lit symmetrically. Now, I have done pieces, you can find them in my like portfolio or on this channel, where I draw something symmetrically, but then I lit it, I light it asymmetrically or from a direction that's not perfectly top down, and that's just more a decision. For this, I thought that one, I probably wanted to get this done kind of quickly, so that was part of doing it this way so I could save some time. And also, I think that it works with in the context of the piece. Having her be just lit straight top down, I think is kind of creepy, so that's what we go with. Now, of course, our symmetry of our shadows isn't just about the form of the actual character, it's also about other things that are creating shadows on these individual forms, like her hair, or like how we've got that black blotch of goo, whatever that is, tar. It's like some sort of a dark, gooey, gross thing. And so we just have to make sure that we toggle off our symmetry in order to hit those spots as well. On the eyes, you'll see that I've added like a little bit of bespeckling within there, just to kind of make those eyes look a little bit more gross and weird. One thing that I wanted to do was I wanted the value between the irises and the sclera to be similar, because I wanted it to be kind of creepy. But at one point I showed it to my buddy Renato, and if you've been following the channel for a while, you know Renato. He was like, oh, I can't really see the irises, and I was like, I know, that's kind of the point. But then I ultimately end up changing it, because even though I had some intentionality around that, if it doesn't read very nicely, if it's something that the viewer feels as a mistake, then that's a bad thing, right? And you want to try and correct that. So there's kind of that balance you have to hit between this is what I intended and this makes it easy to understand for people. That red that just appeared across her whole face, I have no idea what that was. Maybe I was testing shadow color again. Sometimes when I leave a piece and then come back to it, I do that. But here what we're doing is we're putting in some support shadows. This is what I refer to anything that's like its own shadow layer where I'm trying to drive some extra dimensionality or try to give some extra emphasis on a shape. So for instance, I'll use this to darken, for instance, her upper lip. I assume that's going to be coming at some point. It hasn't yet, but usually I darken the upper lip of all characters just because it adds with readability. It's not necessarily a lighting thing, it's just a stylistic thing. In this case, I also added that support to her nose so that the sides of her nose have some of that depth. And then we added a little bit of extra darkening under the eyebrows, between the eyes and the eyebrows, to enhance that socket just a little bit. There's a trick that I do sometimes. Sometimes I do it because it's attractive. Sometimes I do it because it's creepy if I do it right, which is where you take the lip layer, which is just a color layer on top of her skin, and then you blur it a little bit so that it bleeds just a touch outside of the confines. If you do that a lot, you can make something look really creepy. It's kind of like back when Marilyn Manson used to like put lipstick way outside of his lips to make it look really creepy and weird, or it can be used more subtly just to give a little bit of a weirdness to it. Here it's actually fairly subtle, but I did it anyways just to try and enhance a little bit of that bleeding aspect of this chick's skin. She's got these things, these like spots under her skin that are blurred. She's got the really red nose and ears, which shows like a lot of, you know, there's pooling kind of happening under the skin. I just think it's a nice little extra addition. So here we're doing the shadow. This is the cast shadow. So we are now trying to isolate all of the really hard shadows that get cast by other parts of her, since she's the only thing in the scene. So I wouldn't necessarily use this to say capture a hard shadow from like her eyebrow and the ridge underneath that's creating the socket onto the eye, but I would definitely do it for something really protruding like nose, lips, hair, something like that. I'm just trying to push really hard these cast shadow notions so that we can try and really show like a relationship between these objects and how the lighting is reacting and casting shadows across them. This piece also uses a decent amount of the Chromatic Aberration filter that was added to Procreate, so I'll do like a quick rundown of that at the end of this so that you can see how that works. I mean, it's kind of fun to just experiment with anyways. It's not like the most complicated thing to understand, but I think that it might be beneficial. So what's happening at this stage of the illustration? It's a little subtle right now. It'll become much more apparent in a second as I'm adding in the highlights. I need to come up with a better word for it because it's not the highlights. I usually think of the highlights as the brightest spots. It's not actually the highlights. It's more of just like a step above the midtones. Our flats essentially represent our midtones with this style of painting, and so we need to find a way to push a little bit of the dimensionality of the form. I didn't want the highlights on this to be, or the highlights, the midlights, I don't know, midlights. Let's go with midlights, at least for this video until I figure out something better. The midlights are, I hate that. We're not going to call them midlights. The layer that I'm working with right now, we just want to push some extra dimensionality, and I wanted them to not be too bright though. I didn't want her to appear shiny or any aspect of this to really appear too shiny. So we're going with a pretty subtle, toned down lighting. So you'll see it go in, and it'll definitely be apparent once it gets plugged in there. It's starting to happen right now. We're going to start seeing it in see it on her forehead there because the symmetry is turned on. That's why it's also over on the other side by her hair, and we will get that in. But what I wanted to do was I wanted that all to stay fairly tight in value range so that we could put the actual highlights in and have them be extremely bright comparatively. So that's kind of what we're going for here. I thought that with the black goo and the eyes being kind of like wet and glassy, I thought that it would be really nice to just super amp up the intensity of those highlights to really drive home that, and I just felt like that would be kind of creepy. Speaking of creepy, in a second here, we're also going to see a shadow get brought in that's going to cast across her. I just thought that would also be kind of like a nice extra touch and just play with the lighting a little bit and kind of limit what you're able to see as the viewer. It doesn't limit it in terms of like an actual heavy, completely blotted out shadow, but I just think that it's kind of got like a little bit of that cool, like, what is that? Why can't I see what's going on there? Oh God, her eye is, you know, fucked up. Like that kind of a notion. Here you can see when I put in the highlights initially, it was all symmetry, and then I started to remove some of it and put it in kind of like different ways. And so now what we've got here is we've got that nose highlight is a little dimmer than the rest of the highlights, but I wanted to get that in there anyways. And then you can see that the highlights on her eyes, the black goo, and a little bit on her lips is a lot sharper and a lot brighter than everywhere else. So that is a success as far as like that's what I was hoping to do, and then once I got it all plugged together, it felt really nice. So now we've got a little bit of a encroaching vignette shadow happening around her. If you go all the way back to the sketches, at one point she was in front of like a brick wall, and I wanted to do like a brick bathroom wall, like a brick that's all just painted white kind of thing. But then I thought, like, why bring in that extra noise? It doesn't really add anything. It doesn't communicate that much more, and she is obviously the focal point of the piece. So let's just keep it all about Karla here. So here we're adding just a little bit of additional brightening. We're adding some blur at the edges to make things creepy. I was also playing a lot with the glitch filter, so you can see there's a little bit of glitch happening in that blur. And we're just kind of playing with a couple of extra little finishing elements to really make sure that this feels right. You can see right there some extra emphasis on those irises are brought in just to separate them a bit per the feedback from Renato. And then we're going to get like the chromatic aberration in the last couple of passes. This black and white pass, and these were just some alternates that I saved out for fun. So here is the final piece. This was done for Halloween, so again, we're a couple months behind, but we'll be catching up shortly because I had very low output in November and December. But let's talk about the chromatic aberration filter real quick. I thought for the chromatic aberration demo, we would just take like an older piece. That way we're not looking at the exact same thing and you might be able to see kind of how it reacts differently. This was a piece that I had done a while back, and I just flattened it into one layer so that we can start working with it here. I'll go ahead and duplicate it just because that way we can always like go back if we need to. And to do the chromatic aberration filter in Procreate, you just go to your filters and you can see almost all the way at the bottom, chromatic aberration. You tap on it and you get this layer option and this pencil option. I have yet to find any true value with the pencil version. I could see why somebody would, but for my flow it just doesn't work. For chromatic aberration though, while you could do it with the pencil, and I could again see some nice value in doing that, we're not going to do that method right now. We're going to do the layer version. So you've got at the bottom here two different types of chromatic aberration. You've got perspective and you have displace. Perspective is going to work similar to a perspective blur in the sense that this point right here, you look at it as your, let's try to say this as plainly as possible. The least amount of chromatic aberration all the way down to 0 will be where this target is, and the most amount will be the furthest from that target. So let's go ahead and just crank it up. Now you crank up the chromatic aberration by just pressing somewhere on the screen and dragging to the right. You can see here, let's turn it way up. So what this is doing is it's displacing the different channels, but it's doing it based on this target. So you can see as I move this, where the target is getting less aberration, and where the target is not is getting more. Let's go ahead, actually, to make this look really extreme, let's put it up here just for now. So what do these other sliders down here do? The transition, actually we need the fall off first before they do the transition. So the fall off, you can see what we're doing here is we're saying how intense the chromatic aberration is at different points outside of that target. So if it's all the way down, the chromatic aberration starts really, really quickly outside of that target. As we start moving it away, the fall off pushes that chromatic aberration out further and further and further to the point where is it basically off the page? No, it's not quite, but it's almost. So So let's turn this back down, and now let's adjust the transition. The transition, see, when you turn it way up, it makes it so that there's 0 chromatic aberration, and then just suddenly ramps up into the chromatic aberration. You can actually see that line as we're moving the fall off right there. If we lower that, it softens that transition and pulls it closer to the target. So if you want to have something that's kind of like the most standard version of chromatic aberration that you see in a lot of things, you put the target kind of right at your focal point, adjust that fall off so that maybe right where you want people to have the most focus, it's clean, it's clear. And then you adjust your chromatic aberration. If you look down at the M at my signature, you adjust this to get it to be as extreme as you would like it to be. You can see going a little bit like that, so maybe, I don't know, something like that is something where people would notice it, but it's not like too egregious. One thing that you can also do as a quick statement here is you can see that the aberration is sharp. It hasn't done any kind of adjustment to that layer. You can also duplicate this now, and you can blur it. Gaussian blur. Something like that. And then you could even adjust this opacity a bit so that you can try to add like a little bit more decay to the image quality, kind of. This is just a quick thing. All right, let's delete these and let's talk about the other type of chromatic aberration, which, by the way, that type we just went over is the version that I used on the piece that we're talking about today. So the other one is displace. This one's a little bit more straightforward in some ways. So what this is when you put your finger down or your pencil down on the piece, let's get this a little more centered, and you start to drag, you are actually pulling apart your channels. So you can see as I'm moving this, the green channel is staying placed, the red channel is where my finger is, and then the blue channel is like the exact opposite of however I'm moving the red. So if you want to do something super trippy in like 70s like that, then you can do that. But if you want something a little bit more subtle, you actually don't really want to move it all that much, and you can see that you're getting pretty significant distortion. If we just do it really subtly like that, let's see preview, you can see it doesn't seem like you've done that much when you're just kind of staring at it, but then when you see that toggle, you're like, oh shit, that actually was a lot. Now, in order to demo the other sliders down here, let's make this a little bit more extreme again. So let's go with the second one first because it's the more obvious one. Transparency. It just literally is how opaque, how transparent is this effect. If you go to 100% transparency, you might as well not even put this effect on it, and then everything down from that brings it in more and more and more to the point to where it is just very loud. The other one is blur, and that just blurs the effect. It doesn't blur your base illustration. So you can see here, if I max out the blur and then crank up the transparency, you can see that the under illustration isn't getting affected by that blur. It's just the channels that it's blurring. So if we adjust that, we can bring it way down. So what's the purpose of this? Well, the purpose of this is if we want to do something really subtle and kind of like semi-realistic as far as chromatic aberration, we would offset it just a little bit like that. I probably wouldn't adjust the transparency, and then do like a little bit of a blur to it. And what we end up getting is something that feels kind of like a natural chromatic aberration that would probably happen in a real setting. So that's chromatic aberration. Now, the one last thing I will show here is the version that I've actually shown in the past, so that everybody can see the way that chromatic aberration had to be done in Procreate before they added this, and I think that there's still value in doing this. So let's duplicate all of these layers all the way. Come over here to curves, do the whole layer, and so for the first layer it doesn't matter. So let's say red. We're only going to suck all the red and green out of this channel. Now we have a blue channel. Now let's turn that one off for a second and do the same thing to the next one, except now we're going to get rid of all the green and all the blue, so we have a red. And then we're going to go over here and we're going to say we're going to get rid of all of the blue and all of the red. So now we have a green channel. Sorry, I forgot to turn off red so you can see that. So we've got green, red, and blue. If we turn each one of these to lighten, you can see that they're all showing through, quote unquote, like that's a bad way to say that, but they're all showing through. But if you actually go here to one of these, like let's say the blue one, and you move it, you can see you get that blue channel peeking out there. So if you want to try and do a chromatic aberration using this method, you can also grab it and you could do something like warp, and you could do that and warp it. So there's actually more control here. You can do more with this, but it's going to be up to like what you're trying to do. So if I want to push the blue over there and I want to push the red over here, you can start seeing how it's doing this. And then like the green, whoops, the green up here. Now this is a little extreme. I wouldn't recommend necessarily doing it exactly like this, but it gives you a nice idea. And I'm going to quickly undo all of these just so that you can see one other thing that I like about this, which is that you can combine your channel. So right now, for instance, I have combined the blue and the red to get this like pink channel. So you can get a different type of aberration that is not the standard RGB, but it gives you like a different flavor if you're looking for it. You could also similarly, let's change this to normal so we can see it real quick. You could also take this and do just something really crazy with it if you wanted to, and go to like, I don't know, a color that you normally don't see. What's like this, and set it to lighten. See, we're getting like really weird shit now, and like, what does that do? So anyways, the point is you can experiment with it, and it's pretty cool. So those are the Procreate ways of doing chromatic aberration, as well as the old way that has some different control and you can get some more things out of it. I hope that was helpful. I hope this whole video was helpful. If you enjoyed the video, please consider hitting like and subscribe. And if you got anything else that you'd like to see in the future, please let me know. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.